Bob is a very successful and highly respected business owner and executive in his community. His business continues to grow and expand, and he gets into new opportunities all the time, always looking for growth, always looking for opportunity, new ways to do things, new ways to get people in the community involved and engaged. And if there's a community event, if there's a charitable event, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to have Bob's company's name on it as one of the sponsors. Very visible, very active, and easy to like and easy to get to know. Bob came to me one day and was sharing some frustration that he had with his CFO. And we'll say his CFO's name was Dave, and Bob's not the guy's real name either, changing the names just for privacy reasons. But he had this frustration with Dave. And this is what he said. He said, you know, I don't really get Dave. It seems like all he wants to do is sit behind that computer and click on that mouse all day long. I can hardly get him to come out of the office. And what I'm looking for is I want somebody that's going to come to our executive team meeting with ideas and suggestions and opportunities that they've seen. And he just doesn't seem to have any of that. He doesn't seem to have any interest in that. He's really content to just sit behind that desk, stay in the office, and not really engage with the rest of us in the business. So I'm really frustrated, not really sure what to do. Maybe there's something we can do to help him. Maybe I need a new CFO. Well, unfortunately for Dave, it was that last option that Bob finally landed on. He decided that he needed to go out and to find somebody who was going to be more engaged, not just in the financial side of the business, but in the business as a whole. Not just generating financial reports, doing the accounting, making sure the payroll got paid and all those things, but being a significant participant, a significant member of that executive team. Now, Bob's frustration is not unique. You seem to find that more and more often now, where business owners and executives are looking for their finance people to become more strategic. And this was a study that came out a couple of years ago, and it was really focused on, okay, what does the future of finance leadership look like? What is going to be required in order to thrive, to succeed, and really deliver value as a finance leader? And you can see there that they use the term CFOs, and that's really what a lot of those studies come from. But it doesn't matter what your role is. It doesn't matter what your title is. If you are a finance leader, I think this means and applies to you as well. Needing to be more strategically focused. It's going to be fundamental to the role of every finance leader, and more so as time goes on. Same study found that in the list of management skills that would be needed by future CFOs, strategic thinking was mentioned by over half, right up there with leadership skills and change management skills. So we know that this is an area that we need to develop and grow in. And it's one of those non-technical skills that many of us have not had a lot of training in. And we've had to kind of learn it as we go along. There hasn't been a lot of focus. And we need to bolt some of these non-technical skills onto the solid technical skills and abilities that we've built up all along. So a little bit about my background. I've got a very interesting, jagged career path. Spent 18 years in public accounting in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Small local practice. That's where I'm originally from and just moved back there recently. Then I shifted into 15 years in the nonprofit sector. 6 of those, I was the CFO of a very entrepreneurial, almost startup mode nonprofit, also based in the Twin Cities. And then I had the opportunity to become a different kind of CFO, the chief fundraising officer for camps and conference centers. So in some ways, the way I describe it is that I went from the debit side to the credit side of the ledger, and learned an awful lot of interesting things in the process of doing that. And that journey to fundraising took us from Minnesota to California, back to Minnesota, and then most recently, I was the development director at Covenant Harbor in Lake Geneva. And so that's where a lot of my Chicago area connections come from, and had a chance to meet Jerry at one of the Illinois CPA Society conferences about a year ago, and continue to have a lot of strong relationships here in the community. So that was a very interesting, jagged career path that got me to the place where I said, where I really want to focus my full time and attention is in leadership and organizational development, the non-technical side or the soft skill side. And one of my peers in the coaching and consulting world says, John, you're a hard skills guy with a soft skills passion. And there's a lot of truth to that, because even going back 20 plus years ago to my CPA career, I found that I was paying as much attention to what was going on organizationally, what was going on in terms of leadership, not just looking at financial statements and data and analysis. So it was questions like, why is it that some organizations really thrive and grow and others don't? Why is it that within an organization you have some leaders where everyone wants to work for that individual, and then there are other leaders where people can't wait to get off their team, and they even leave the organization altogether? And so I've been on this journey of kind of figuring those things out, and in 2016 decided to launch my own leadership coaching and consulting practice. The people that I work with are people much like you. I'm real heavy in the finance area since it's my background. Work with a lot of CPAs, CPA firms, CFOs, others that are on similar track. The work that I do is a combination of one-on-one individual coaching. I do a fair amount of team and group facilitation, and then training and speaking, kind of like what we're doing here today. So the stuff that we're talking about today, I have great passion for, and I love to talk about it. So if we don't get a chance to answer your question or to engage in some of the things that you're interested in today, look me up, because I'm always game to have those conversations. There's always some interesting things to learn and some things that I might be able to contribute for you and your work as well. When you get the slide deck, as Vince said, you'll have my business card with everybody else's, but at the back of the slide deck, you'll see my contact information, and LinkedIn is another place where you can connect with me. I try to keep a relatively active presence there. Well, that's the professional side. Now, what about the most important? Well, I am the husband of one, the father of three, and the grandfather of four. So how many grandparents in the room? All right, so you guys know exactly what I mean when I say these four littles are the highlight of our life right now. We are just having a blast with this whole grandparenting thing. We were on a hot streak for girls. We have June, Layton, and this is Reagan in the bottom right. And then the day after Christmas, Griffin arrived and kind of broke that chain and broke that hot streak. So we're having a blast, and that was a big reason why we decided to move back to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Now, we thought long and hard about going somewhere south, somewhere a little bit warmer, somewhere with a little bit more gentle winters, and our kids were having none of it, and the gravitational pull back to the Twin Cities was just way too hard. So this winter, like every other day, I know you guys had the same kind of brutal winter that we did, we would look at each other and say, why? Why did we do this, my wife and I? But it was only usually a matter of 24 or 48 hours, and we'd get a chance to see one of these faces, and we go, okay, yeah, this is why we did this. All right, so we're going to dive into this topic of strategic thinking today, and I thought it would be helpful for us to start off with a definition. It's one of those terms that's a little squishy. Sometimes we don't really know what we mean when we talk about strategy or we talk about strategic thinking or even strategic planning. I heard of one finance leader who was in her annual review with her boss, and her boss got to that part in the review, it's like opportunities for development. You know what that part of the review is, right? Whether you've been on the receiving or the giving side. That's the part that everybody's most anxious about and most interested in. If a person doesn't hear anything else you said, they're going to be really dialed in at that part. Well, this gal's boss said to her, I need you to be more strategic. And she said, okay, what do you mean? Well, I just need you to think more strategically. I need you to have more strategic ideas when you come to our meetings. And he could not define what he meant by strategic without using the word itself. And so it's a little troublesome because then we're kind of left with this nebulous idea, what are we talking about? So let's talk about what that is, give a little definition to it. So the first definition comes out of some academic material. So Irene Sanders has written this book about strategic thinking, and she says that strategic thinking has two components. It's insight about the present, and foresight about the future. A couple of your neighbors, Chicago area guys, Aaron Olson and Keith Simerson, who teach at Northwestern, wrote an excellent book, Leading with Strategic Thinking, and they talk about it being a mental map that connects the here and now with something, somewhere, at some time in the future. So that relates back to Sanders' definition about the present and the future. It's a way to connect the dots. And I like those definitions, but I feel like they come up a little short, because what's our purpose in all this? You know, what really are we driving for when we think about getting into more strategic thinking? And so my definition adds the customer into the mix. And I look at strategic thinking as a process of exploring new and improved approaches to meet customer needs. Because let's face it, if you don't meet customer needs, what's going to happen? You're going to go out of business. You got to have customers to have revenue. You got to have revenue to pay the bills. So if we're not finding new and improved ways to serve those customers, eventually those customers are going to go somewhere else. And so part of this strategic thinking skill is figuring out how do we better serve the customers we have now, and how do we get more of them? So when we think about strategic thinking, there's some different elements to it. First off, it is future-oriented. We're thinking about today's customers and their needs today, and then looking out, again, this is that foresight about the future, looking out into the future and thinking about our future customers and what their needs will be. And it's that space in that arrow that gives us a lot of opportunity for strategic thinking, to find those new and improved ways to meet those needs. Now, when we look at that, our future customers might be the same customers we have today, with more. Hopefully we're growing and we're adding more customers all the time. But part of strategic thinking is figuring out, are we in the right business? Are we serving the right kinds of customers? Because it might be that in the future we need to look at an entirely different kind of customer. So again, insight about the future, foresight about the future, even when we think about the customer that we serve. Part of that future orientation is watching emerging trends in the marketplace. You've got to see, where is the economy going? Where is the marketplace going? Where is your industry going? And you have to be able to anticipate based on the changes that you're seeing. And this particular slide reminds me of the quote when somebody asked Wayne Gretzky, why he was the greatest hockey player that had ever played the game. He said, most players skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going to be. And he had this innate sense of where to go, where to position himself, and that's why he scored so many goals. That's why he had so many points in his NHL career. Well, I think as finance leaders, we need to do a little bit more Gretzky. We need to go to where the puck is going to be, not just where it is right now. Not chasing where it is and where it's been, but thinking, how can we get out ahead of the game? So several different kinds of trends that you want to watch for in the marketplace. Globalization. If you had told me 10 years ago, when I was contemplating this eventual idea of getting into the consulting world, that I would be talking with people on different continents, I would have said, no, that's not going to happen. Australia, Portugal, the UK. I'm a single guy. I'm a solo practitioner, solopreneur. But the reality is now with technology, we are working with people all over the globe at any point in time. So we've got to watch for what are the impacts of globalization on our businesses. The economic movement, paying attention to what's going on, watching the indicators, figuring out, where things going in terms of interest rates, in terms of, investment values, and all those things that have an impact on your business and also on your customers and their businesses. The demographic shifts, some really significant shifts that have taken place. And, you think about the millennials, the Generation Y, there's been a lot of attention paid to that generation, to that cohort. And what are the differences between the baby boomers and Gen X and Gen Y? And we still haven't figured that out yet, have we? We're still wrestling with it. It doesn't matter if you're on the older end of that spectrum or if you're on the younger end. We're still trying to figure out how to work well together. Well, guess what? Now we got Generation Z coming into the workplace. You know, the people that are graduating from college right now are from a little different cohort than even the millennials. There's some similarities there, but there's also some differences. So figuring out, what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of our workforce? But also, what does that mean in terms of the customers that we serve? Technology, of course, is always changing. You know, what is artificial intelligence going to do? You know, what are some of the other things that that we need to be watching for? And then, of course, we've got regulatory changes that impact the very work that we're doing as well. So strategic thinking is, first off, future-oriented. Secondly, strategic thinking is customer-focused. So who is your target market? Who is it that you're serving? And I find it really interesting because I have an opportunity to talk to people that are in very small, like one-person businesses, up to very large organizations with hundreds of employees, thousands of employees. And I find that it can be challenging no matter what size business, no matter what industry you're in, to really define that target market and to figure out who really is the customer that I'm after and trying to serve. And what are their needs? And then the big thing is that anticipation. How are those needs changing? Because remember, strategic thinking is about new and improved ways to serve your customer, to serve customer needs, to help solve their problems. Now, with that, there's an interesting theory about innovation that I want to share. Is there anybody in the group that is familiar with the jobs to be done theory of innovation? Anybody familiar with that term? Okay, so just a quick run through on that. The concept comes from a guy by the name of Clayton Christensen. He is from the Harvard Business School, and I would be happy to send you a link to a podcast interview that he did where he talks about this theory, this jobs to be done theory. And it's almost, he's got a very dry sense of humor, but it's really funny to listen to him because he uses the McDonald's milkshake as his case study. And so fascinating. He's got some really good books out there about disruptive innovation. And basically, the theory rests on this idea that customers don't just buy products, they hire them to do a job. They hire them to solve a problem. So you might not be able to see this if you're toward the back of the room, but what we say is people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. What they really are buying is a quarter-inch hole. Now, I heard a story, I don't know if it's true, but it was Black & Decker or one of those companies, you know, they were having a meeting of their sales and marketing people and kind of working on this concept. And the guy who was presenting actually had one of those cordless drills in his hand, went over to the wall and drilled a hole in the wall. Now, hopefully he had gotten permission from the hotel or the conference center to do that first. But it was a real visible example of, hey, what we're really selling here isn't so much the drill, it's the hole. So what does that mean? That means in terms of our marketing, in terms of our messaging, and even just the way we think about our products, our services, and our customers, we can't just sit on features and benefits. We need to be thinking about the outcome and the value that that customer is getting from those products and services. You know, we're real comfortable over here talking about features and benefits, but sometimes it's a little harder for us to think in terms of the outcome and the value. So, you know, this is the what, the drill is the what. That's the solution that gets me to my ultimate goal, which is the quarter-inch hole. That's the job to be done. That's why I buy this drill. So I thought it would be fun this morning to give you a chance to kind of let your wheels turn a little bit on this job to be done theory. And I found an incredibly relevant example given the time frame that we're in. How many of you have not yet filed your tax return for 2018? Okay, yeah, I figured, so about a third maybe of the group. I still have mine, and I'm trying to figure, okay, what do I need to do to get this thing out the door? So whether you are on the preparation side, meaning that you're getting your return prepared, or even doing it yourself, Or how many of you have prepared, either now or in the past, have prepared tax returns for others? Okay, so about half of people in the group. So you can kind of relate to, this example from both perspectives. So the question is, when it comes to an individual getting their tax return prepared, what is the job to be done? What is it that taxpayer is hiring that tax preparation service, that CPA firm, that software to do for them? What is the problem they're trying to solve, the job they're trying to get done? Yes?
Stay out of jail.
Stay out of jail. Yeah, there were times when I was in my CPA practice where clients would, I think it was half joking, but there were a few that I was not entirely sure. I see this as a way to keep out of trouble with the IRS. What's another possibility? What's another job to be done?
Minimize the tax bill.
Okay, minimize the tax bill. Looking at ways to minimize the tax liability. Okay, another one. I saw a couple hands flinch over on this side. Another possibility, yes? Refund, yeah, I want my refund. So here's what I found with some of my less sophisticated taxpayers or less sophisticated individual tax clients. They weren't as much focused on lowering the tax liability as they were getting their refund. And so what happened in that year after year of getting a refund, what happened in that year when I called them and said, oh, Joe, by the way, this year you have a balance due. You're going to have to write a check to the IRS for $5,000. What happens? You're the bad guy, unhappy, you're fired. Because in their mind, I didn't do the job that they hired me to do. My job in their mind was to get them their refund. And I didn't fulfill that responsibility.
It's like the press this year saying, tax reform didn't work because people aren't getting as big of refunds.
Yeah, and you get all this noise in the media that doesn't help anything. I've got a friend that's a CPA, does a lot with real estate, and he really gets frustrated when people get hung up on the refund and people are looking at the size of the refund and making a judgment based on that, when it really is, whatever that line number. I mean, now the whole thing has changed, and I don't even know what the line numbers are anymore, where that tax liability is. What are some other possibilities? So we've got a few good ones. Other possibilities on the job to be done. Yeah, Jerry.
I would say, in my case, it would be taking an immovable deadline off a to-do list.
Ah, okay. So getting the deadline off the to-do list. So it's a way for me to shift that obligation or that burden to somebody else or to something else. Because I've got this deadline I've got to meet, and I'm not going to do it myself. Yeah, another one.
Identify ways to minimize future taxes.
Yeah, so tax planning, thinking about the future. Maybe it's somebody that's got a business or investment property and thinking about, okay, down the road, I'm going to try to maximize my tax value on that. And there were some other things that came up from the clients that I had. There were a few that were self-employed, and I think more than anything else, they wanted me to help them figure out how much to put in their retirement accounts. So you get the return done, the Schedule C or whatever it is, and now, okay, let's maximize our retirement and the tax liability and cash flow and all that. So, the retirement planning, cash flow planning can be a part of it. And, here was the one that I got a kick out of, was that I had one client who he told me that this was his one luxury purchase of the year. This guy was very bare bones, lived a very simple life, had a small W-2, not a whole lot more. And he would come in, he was the real deal, though, when he came in the office. He'd have a briefcase. And he'd say, John, I'm going to leave you the briefcase. And I'm like, please don't leave me the briefcase. Because I knew there was only like 3 sheets of paper in there that I needed. It was like, his W-2 and his mortgage statement. And I'm like, Jim, you really don't have to pay me to come in and do your return. You've got lots of options that would, nope, this is my luxury purchase. I like coming in here every year, talking to you. I know you're going to do a good job for me. And I'm like, okay, I never really been thought of as a luxury purchase. I'd been seen as the kind of the lesser of evils. Do I do it myself or do I hire somebody to do it for me? But this is just a relatively simple and easy to understand example that there are a lot of possibilities when we think about the job to be done. So here's one of the problems, and you can relate this to your own business and your own customers as well. Sometimes, as the business owner or the business managers, we get like a one-track mind, thinking this is the job to be done for our customer, and so we get our messaging, our marketing focused in a single direction, and we don't always know what really is it that they're hiring us to do? What really is the problem to be solved? Probably the best example of this that I had was I was doing a similar presentation, similar kind of brainstorming with a CPA group in Kansas. And there was a gal there who works for the company. I can't remember the name of the big company, but their company produces the Yankee candles. So you go into gift stores and card shops and whatever, and you can find all these different scents, and I don't really understand all that stuff, but you got Mountain Breeze and Northwoods and all those things. And she was sitting there, and I could tell she was really thinking, and she came up to me at the break and she said, "You know what, John? I was thinking about the job to be done, and I think for a lot of our customers, they buy our candle to take them somewhere else. When they light that candle, it takes them to the North Woods, or it takes them to Grandma's house, because the smell reminds them of another place. And even though they physically can't go to that place, the smell gives them a chance to experience that." And I thought, that's brilliant. I'm like, you got to go to your marketing department and talk about that, because it's huge. So thinking about all those different avenues. Now, who was the master of figuring out this job to be done when it came to customers and potential customers? Okay, you're naming some really good names, and those names are going to come up again a little bit later, but I use the word job, and it's jobs. So Steve Jobs was a master of this. So I've got Apple as the example here in terms of innovation. Really innovation is our response to changing customer needs and expectations. And the mastery of Steve Jobs was that he figured out that we needed things before we needed them ourselves. How many of you, so it's 2019, let's go back 12 years ago, how many of you 12 years ago would have said, I absolutely have to have a smartphone, where I have these apps where I can, get a cab or of course Uber didn't even exist then, but, or I can order a pizza, or I can check my email, or I can look at the weather forecast. No, 12 years ago, we didn't even know that. We didn't know it was possible. And now, how many of you would willingly give up your smartphone? I mean, I saw a survey, and I can't remember where it was taken, but it was like, there are people who say, I would rather cut off one of my fingers than give up my smartphone. I mean, that's how dependent we've been. So it's that anticipation, and that's really the essence of innovation, is thinking about where your customers are going and how you can get out there ahead of them with some solutions, with some ways to meet their needs and expectations. Part of this is differentiation. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just in terms of an awareness within your industry and market and competition, as you do this, how can you be the red gummy bear in a sea of clear gummy bears? How can you stand out among your competition? And that's going to mean your messaging and your marketing, but really what it comes back to, new and better ways to serve your customers. Always looking for new and better ways to serve your customers. It's going to take your capabilities, understanding where your strengths are, where your resources are as a company or an organization to do that. It really is about leveraging those capabilities to get you a competitive advantage. So you have to have that base to work from. And we'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. Now, let me just, before we dive into some questions that will help to inspire some strategic thinking, let me just take a brief moment to do some comparison between strategic thinking and strategic planning. Is traditional strategic planning dead? No, I don't think so. But I think it is insufficient in today's marketplace without strategic thinking. And here's some of the reasons why. Where strategic planning is more static and rigid and linear, and it is done at a certain time in a certain schedule with an end in mind. Strategic thinking is dynamic, it's flexible, it's nonlinear, it's agile, it's nimble. It gives you an opportunity to do this on a continuing basis. It's always evolving. It's not, okay, we're done with our strategic plan, now we can go back to what we do every day. Strategic thinking is about weaving that into your normal routines, not waiting for a strategic planning process. How many of you have been a part of a strategic planning process? Okay, so most of you have. And what have you found the biggest pitfall to be in that process? And it doesn't necessarily all have to be the same answer. Maybe you get a couple different answers. What's the biggest pitfall of the typical strategic planning process? Yeah, in the back. Groupthink. Groupthink. Yeah, and why does groupthink happen?
You get nowhere fast.
Okay, yeah, you get...
Well, everybody's trying to go the same direction. You get no new ideas. You get nowhere fast.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I think that happens, that groupthink, is that strategic planning is usually limited to a certain group of people. It's the board, it's the executive team, they may bring in a consultant to help facilitate, but it's people at a really high level in the organization. One of the things I love about strategic thinking is anyone can do it. In fact, I think you need to teach everybody on your team how to do strategic thinking, because sometimes the best ideas come from people that are closer to the customer, closer to the action, not sitting in the executive suite. So what's another potential pitfall of traditional strategic planning?
Usually it's a period of time, like 3 years,
Yeah.
5 years maybe, but there's, rather than looking, we need way out what the customer we want longer than that period of time.
It's a fixed period of time that we're looking at. We don't always think about what comes after that, what comes before that. And honestly, I think a lot of the strategic plans that I've been a part of, they're just glorified budgets. There's not really a whole lot more to it than that. Any other pitfalls of strategic plan? Yeah.
There's one that was there a year earlier, so you're always grounding off something rather than opening your mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that you had the strategic plan last year or 3 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever your company's cycle is, that ends up being kind of the baseline that you start from, or the foundation. And what does that do? Well, it's an anchor point. It's that pull, that gravitational pull back to what you already have as opposed to new thinking. Yeah, one more.
Because you have to accomplish something in a strategic planning process, it's not open-ended.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
It doesn't lend itself to just, we're going to think about strategic plan thinking. We're going to think, not necessarily do.
Yeah. It has an end. It's episodic. The process ends, and what usually happens at the end of the strategic planning process. Now, it may not be in a literal sense anymore, but you get a 3-ring binder, and where does that 3-ring binder go? On the shelf. And how often does that get pulled back out and referenced? Now, some companies leverage that strategic plan very well, so I don't want to dismiss that, but there's an awful lot of organizations where it goes back on the shelf, and the next day, so we had this wonderful time. We went to a conference center, maybe played some golf, had some great dinner and some expensive wine, and had all these great ideas. It goes into this thing, and then we just go back to what we were doing before, because the whirlwind of daily activity can consume us. And again, that's why being more nimble and being more dynamic with strategic thinking can be so helpful. So in a lot of ways, I think of the difference this way. Strategic planning is a destination, where strategic thinking is the journey. In the journey, you're continually on the move. You're continually going. It's not the sense of being done. We're done with our strategic plan. Now we can go back to doing the more important things. And it's like, nah, I think that's getting things backwards. I saw a hand.
You can do the planning, and what's the phrase, like the best laid plans and God laughs or something? If you plan for the environment you're in, but the environments are changing so rapidly nowadays that you need to be able to continually assess.
Absolutely true.
Steer your ship.
Yeah, if you go back to that slide about trends, that's very true. You're constantly seeing these shifts in the marketplace, and so if you're not adapting to those, you can easily end up with a strategic plan that's no longer relevant. And so I think that you weave the two together, strategic planning and strategic thinking, to get the best advantage. All right. The foundation really, I think, is the same between the two. I really believe that the SWOT analysis creates the foundation that you need for both strategic planning and strategic thinking, because you have to have some baseline to work from. And remember what I said earlier, part of strategic thinking is figuring out how to leverage your capabilities, how to leverage your strengths for a competitive advantage. Well, it's pretty hard to do that if you don't know what those are. So you've got to know, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses? Those are the internal things. What are the opportunities and the threats? That's where having your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the marketplace and in your industry can be so helpful. So you get that down. And here's what I've been suggesting to clients, is that you do a SWOT analysis, and yeah, sometimes when you're doing the full-blown, formal, kind of, structured strategic plan, that might go on for pages. I think if you could get your basic SWOT analysis down to like a 4x6 Post-it note or index card, you just keep that thing right there by your monitor, or you keep that right there on your desk. Maybe you laminate it so that you're always able to reference it. And if you laminate it, you can use a dry erase marker to make notes as you're going along. Because I think once you get this SWOT analysis done, you want to constantly be looking at, how is this changing? I'm not going to wait until next year's strategic planning process or 3 years down the road when we do the full-blown strategic plan again. No, I'm going to be constantly monitoring our SWOT and watching for what's taking place in our business and in the marketplace. So that's a good foundation to work from in both places. And that's where you can use what you did in your last strategic planning session or your last strategic planning project to kind of form that base for strategic thinking. Now, what I'd like to do, and these come from Stanley Abram, who's a great thinker when it comes to strategic thinking and planning. And he's got 6 questions that you can use to inspire strategic thinking. Now, as Vince said, we're going to send the slide deck out with the business card, so make sure you get your card in the bucket, and we'll get that to you. But these are some really good questions because back to where we started, and we said, okay, what really is strategic thinking? It's a little fuzzy. Do we really know what we mean by that? And how do we become more strategic? How do we get more strategic thinking? Most of us need a little help in that regard. So here's 6 questions that you can use. The first one is, what other type of customer could benefit from our product or service? So we've got a certain line of products and services that we provide to our customers. There must be other businesses or individuals out there who would buy these same products or services. And this one's a fairly easy one, okay? So this is a little bit low-hanging fruit, right? Most of us could come up with an example in our business of how we have applied that question. I'll just give you one example from my CPA days. As we were moving, I came across some old swag from the CPA firm. I think this was the only piece that I had left other than a business card. But in our practice, we had a pretty significant healthcare practice, and I do a lot of work in that area still now. And one sliver of that, we did a lot of work for residential providers of services for people with developmental disabilities. I realize that's a long way to describe an industry, but group homes for people with developmental disabilities. And that was a part of the practice that I was able to grow over time because I was figuring out what was the job to be done for those providers, for those businesses. And as we were building that side of the practice, I started to realize that there was a whole nother side, a whole different side of that industry, and that was the day providers. So the vocational training and job service providers for people with developmental disabilities. So they're dealing with the same population, a lot of the same regulations, and it's like, okay, let's put our foot in the water there and see if we can develop that side. And so, toward the end of my career in public accounting, we were seeing more growth on that side, the day training and habilitation services, than we were on the residential. Basically the same products and services, but just expanding to a new line of customers. So that's question number 1. How do we find other customers for what we already do? Here's question number 2. what other products or services could we produce for our existing customers? So we've already got the customers. I think everybody knows that it's easier to sell more to your current customers than it is to go out and get new ones. But sometimes what that requires is for us to think about what are the other problems that those customers have that need solving? What are the other challenges they're facing that they would pay us to help them face and solve? Other products or services for existing customers. And I'd love to just hear maybe, an example from the group where your business has done that. You've looked at your customer base and you've said, oh, here's another way that we can serve them, another product or service. Anybody have a good example of that? And it's totally okay to brag. So, yeah, Jerry.
So I was in plastic resin manufacturing quite a few years ago. We used to have off-spec material and we'd throw it away. But I think the sales VP came up with the idea, well, you know what? Instead of landfilling it, what if we sold it at a huge discount to somebody that has an application that the colored chips don't make any difference because you don't see it. The customer doesn't see it. Okay. And so we pretty much eliminated all the landfill and paying somebody to haul it away and destroy the environment and that type of thing. So that's a small example.
Yeah, so and that could probably work for existing customers as well as new customers. We had a dental lab as a client, and they found some new ways to, whatever the waste is from the gold fillings and all that, ways to use that as a revenue stream. Any other examples? Existing customers, but finding a new product or service that you could offer. Yes?
So we cash checks for people, currency exchanges, but we also add motor vehicle services. So
okay.
And sometimes it's not even the same customer. So a customer who uses a bank and doesn't need to cash their check still needs to get their driver's their sticker for their car updated. So they'll come into us maybe just for that service, but it's also offered to our other customers.
Yeah, great example. I love that example because, okay, there's a problem that needs to be solved, right? So you get somebody that they're already a customer with cashing checks or doing currency exchanges, but we've got another way we can solve a different problem. How many of you would look at having to go to the DMV to renew your driver's license or your tabs as a problem? A problem that you would pay money for somebody to solve. Thank goodness that we can go online and do that, and it just makes it so much easier. But not necessarily true of everybody because they might not have the accounts or whatever. So here's a company that says, hey, we can serve that same customer and solve another problem. There's a job to be done there. Yeah, another example.
So at Costco, you buy big electronics and they solve the problem by renting trucks. So now they rent trucks for $19 for the hour for you to get your big TV.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen it at Menards too, where the Menards will have a pickup truck with their logo and whatever, and it's like, okay, you bought material that you don't have the vehicle. I'm like, I don't need to buy a pickup truck. I can just use the one that's there. I was doing this presentation, and there was a young gal, probably in her 20s. She and her husband had bought a house, and they were doing a lot of work on it. And, part of it was they wanted to stay green. They didn't want to accumulate a lot of stuff. And she said, what we've done is rather than us buying all the power tools that we need, when we go to Home Depot and we buy our materials, we also rent the tools that we need. You can rent a drill. You can rent a saw. It doesn't have to be the big stuff like, the rototillers and stuff like that you would normally think of. And it was like, that way, if they're only going to use a drill a few times in a year, why buy one, when you can rent? Yeah, one more, and then we'll move on.
That's what neighbors are for.
That's what neighbors are for, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and maybe that's a sign of our time where neighbors aren't talking across the fence anymore or across the driveway. Hey, can I borrow a cup of sugar, or can I borrow your ladder or your drill? Yeah. I love this example that comes from the marketplace. So I don't know if any of you had this experience, but I remember when, this is probably 15 years ago, when I was playing a lot of golf, and I would usually stop at a convenience store on my way and pick up a couple of bottles of Gatorade. And I would go to the cooler and I would look, and they had all these flavors of Gatorade, and there was like 3 different ones that were blue. And I'm like, is there really a difference between these blue Gatorade, or is it the same and they just have a different label on the, on the plastic bottle? I couldn't really tell that, and it was pretty indistinguishable. And what Gatorade learned was that expanding the number of flavors or the number of labels, it wasn't selling any more Gatorade. In fact, there's studies that if you put too many options out there, it's that a paralysis by analysis thing, and people don't buy anything because they're like, I don't know what to buy. I'm just going to walk away. It's too confusing. So what Gatorade said instead was, who's our customer? Who is it that we are serving? And they said it's the athlete. Now, that athlete can be anything from the professional to the couch potato who would like to get out and exercise but can't get away from their TV set, and anything in between. And basically what Gatorade said was, okay, if our customer is the athlete, how do we get more of our stuff in their gym bag? Or in their hockey bag, or whatever it is, whatever sport they're playing. And so they started to shift beyond the sport drink and come up with other things. And you can see there's energy bars, protein shakes, other things like that you can now buy with the Gatorade label on it. So instead of just coming up with more variety of the same product, they said, what are other problems that we can help our athlete customers solve? Well, it's getting the protein either before or after the workout and all of that. So question number 2 is about our existing customers, but what are some other products or services that we could offer? What are some other jobs to be done? What are some other problems to be solved? Question number 3, what other products or services could we produce from the skills, techniques, technologies, and know-how we already have? So that's knowing your capabilities. That's that SWOT analysis, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, and leaning into those strengths to say, okay, we've got these capabilities, we've got these resources, we've got this know-how, what else can we do with it? Anybody recognize this logo? Classic example, right? So what did Amazon start out as? Books, online books. Did they make a profit? They were losing money like crazy. And I kept thinking in those early years, I'm like, how is this going to continue? So they're already starting to put some of the bookstores out of business, and Barnes & Noble and some of the other big chains were struggling with the competition or whatever, but they're losing money. And I'm like, where is this thing going? You can't keep losing money forever and stay in business. Well, where did they go next? So they started out with selling books online. Anybody remember the next category that they got into? So it was like DVDs, movies, music, and that kind of thing. And then, well, if we're going to sell movies and we're going to sell music, why don't we sell the equipment that they're going to want to play that stuff on? And you can see where this has gone. And basically what Amazon said was, we've got these existing capabilities. We've got the online sales system down. We've got the online payment avenues. So what else can we do with those capabilities? What can we do with our distribution network, our purchasing network, and all of that? And so over time, Amazon they sell just about anything. I mean, I was dumbfounded when my daughter, just shortly after she had had her first baby, and there was a guy that pulled up in a little car in the driveway, ran up to the door with a grocery bag, and just set it down at the door. And I'm like, some guy just drove up and left something. I don't know if it's a prank or what it is. Were you expecting something? She said, oh, that's Amazon. They deliver diapers. And I'm like, seriously? Didn't know that. But you can pretty much get anything from Amazon. So what they did was they leveraged those resources they already had. And then, of course, they've obviously built on from that. And it's interesting because one time when I was using these questions as an example, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, John, you could probably use Amazon as the answer to all 6 of those questions. I mean, it really is true. Some of those household names that you mentioned earlier would be a great example of that. All right, so question number 3, existing capabilities, what more can we do with that? And that's whether same customers or new customers. Question number 4, is there a way of reinventing our business model that would give us a competitive edge? Now we're getting to some that are a little more complicated. There's a little more to it when we think about changing the business model. Anybody work in a company or an organization where, whether it's on a wholesale basis or just in some, pocket or part of the company where you've changed your business model? Okay, anybody want to share an example if it's something that, is easy to explain or understand?
We used to manufacture a lot of household products, cleaning. One of the strategies that we had was we would work with a lot of our Asian suppliers because we did not have had enough competitive and capability to be able to produce those products. However, one of the strategic plan was how do we bring them in-house? And we have successfully brought them in-house to our own manufacturing companies. Not only that we reduced the cost of goods, but we were also be able to reduce the pricing to outperform our competitors. And we've successfully achieved that tremendously.
Okay, so there's an example of
Change in the business model of rather than working with the suppliers, we start taking them in-house.
Yeah, so rather than buying from the outside, we produce the product ourselves.
Because you also save at least 5% profit markup.
Yeah,
That goes out.
we get the markup, makes us more competitive. Yeah, good example. There was another hand that went up.
So in the CPA firms, you see a lot of the big buildings housing all the staff accountants, and they just changed and went to hoteling and minimized the brick and mortar.
Yeah, so going to more of a virtual, that's a little bit more of an internal focus than it is customer, but it's obviously it's going to change the footprint, in terms of what they need. One other example, yeah.
Work for a manufacturer of medical diagnostic equipment, and they worked through distributors to get their equipment out into the marketplace. And they strategically figured we need to get rid of our distributorships because we're not gaining the market share and the resulting profit from all the things that you need to run those.
Okay.
So they cut the distributorship on a particular day. We collected all of the existing contracts and went out. We actually bought the market by it's the analogy of the razor and the razor.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
But you're going to pay for the reagents.
Yeah. So there's another example of cutting out the middle person. This is on the sales side where take out the distribution and just sell directly to whoever those customers are. I love the CPA example. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with it, but even in the CPA world, you find a lot of firms that are going away from the typical we bill by the hour. It's however many hours, we add in our reimbursable expenses, and that's what we charge. There's more focus on fixed pricing, value pricing. If you're developing that relationship with the customer, you may have a monthly contract. There's a bundled service contract, and it almost functions like a subscription. Software, we're doing that now. Remember, you used to get the DVDs, or back in the day when you got the tapes, or the floppy drives, the floppy disks, and you would install the software. Well, most software is not sold that way anymore. Most software is really now a subscription. It's a license that you buy and you get access to it online. Here's one of the classic examples of disruption by changing the business model. So Blockbuster and Netflix. Now, Blockbuster, there's one store left. I don't know if you guys saw that, but just in the last couple of weeks, there's one store left in Bend, Oregon. Speaking of floppy disks, they use floppy disks. And they, there's some kind of a retro thing going on where people go back to this Blockbuster mecca, and I think they're trying to create T-shirts and whatever else. They're probably making more money off of other things than they are, videos and that. But what was Blockbuster's business model? Where did they make their money?
Late fees.
That's exactly right. Because the business model is really where do we make our money? It's the economic engine that drives. And Blockbuster made more money off of charging their customers late fees than they did the actual video rental. So you forget to drop it off on your way home from work, or it gets, kind of falls under the, the dirty clothes that are piling up in the corner, and all of a sudden those late fees are taken away. Now, can you imagine being in a business where you are dependent on punishing your customers in order to make a profit? There's something fundamentally wrong with that, but that was exactly what was happening. Their profit was really coming out of late fees. Netflix comes along, and when they started, not where they are now, but when Netflix started, what was their business model? And how was it different from Blockbuster? They would mail the DVD to your house. And what about late fees? Were there late fees?
I don't think you just couldn't take another one out.
Yeah, they changed the model, so you didn't pay any late fees, but you just couldn't get the next DVD until you returned the one that you had. And there were packages where you could get one at a time or three at a time, and I don't remember how it was all divided up. But, you know, very quickly it was this idea of, oh, so I don't have to pay extra if I want to watch the movie again, or if I want my kids to watch it, or, you know, let my daughter and son-in-law borrow it before we send it back. No longer did you have these penalties that you were paying. And of course, Netflix has evolved since then. Can you still get the DVDs in the mail? I don't even know if you can get them anymore, is it? You can, okay. But by and large, Netflix profits are coming from where? Streaming. Subscription. And now they're producing their own shows, and I fully believe that, you know, at some point they may have, you know, a major sports league that they broadcast. I mean, who knows where this thing is going to go. Here's the interesting thing. I just looked up again yesterday to refresh. In the year 2001, Blockbuster had an opportunity to buy Netflix for $50 million. So 18 years ago, $50 million, you're sitting on the Blockbuster board of directors, or you're sitting in their executive suite, and you say, no thanks, I think we'll just keep what we've got. Guess what Blockbuster's market value is today? Every time I do this, it goes up. I looked it up yesterday, it's $161 billion. Netflix, sorry. Blockbuster's zero, yeah. Let's get that right. Thank you. So Netflix market value now $161 billion, and there's a lot of Blockbuster executives going, man, we missed the boat on that. But it was this disruption of the business model. So looking at different ways to turn that economic engine, use the capabilities, use the product or service line, figure out a different way to meet the customer needs, and generate more profit, more growth in the process. All right, next question. What unmet needs do people or customers have that, or companies have that we could meet, even if it means that we have to acquire the necessary know-how and expertise? So this is where we recognize that there are customers to be gained out there, or there are new ways to serve our existing customers, but we don't have the capabilities for it. So we've identified an opportunity, go back to your SWOT, we've identified an opportunity, but we don't have the strength to leverage. We don't have the capability to leverage. Anybody have an example of that where in your company, you know, maybe past or present, you've seen, okay, here's a new line of business that we can get into, a new product or service that we can offer, but we're going to have to actually go out and develop the capability to do it. Again, it's a little bit different, yeah.
So auto insurance.
Okay.
So it's a logical extension of what we do with our motor vehicle services and other financial services for our customers. Oftentimes we see them getting a money order and taking it to their insurance agent 2 doors down and buying insurance. So, but it's a more complex transaction. You know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, not 2 minutes to cash a check.
Right.
So we need to, and it's got different rules and everything else. So we probably need to add that expertise and not try to build it.
Okay.
We can offer it, but we're not doing very well because it's very different from what we do.
Yeah, so it's something different. It might take some time to develop, scale it up, and all that. But you know, if you didn't hear in the back, so you know they've got the cashing checks, currency exchange. Now they've got DMV services, and they see that people are getting money orders to pay their auto insurance. Hey, why don't we just get that money for the auto insurance too? You know, it's like, you know, the more we can serve that customer, the more they'll do business, the more of their wallet, you know, we're able to have them leave here. And in that case, because of regulations and everything else, you know, that's something that, you know, is not an existing capability. It's going to take something from the outside. Love that example. Here's another example that you can all relate to. So McDonald's was looking at, you know, their competition, you know, the Jimmy John's and the Domino's Pizza and whatever, you know, who would deliver your dinner or would deliver your lunch for you. And they're like, man, we got to figure out a way to deliver are Big Macs. And McDonald's said, we don't really want to get into the transportation or the delivery business. So how can we do that? Well, we go out and we acquire that resource, that know-how, that expertise, the assets to do that, the network to do that, by partnering with Uber. And you got Uber Eats. So Uber will deliver your Big Mac. So the good news is you don't have to leave your desk or you don't have to leave your house to get it. The bad news is I'm not sure what kind of shape that Big Mac is going to be in once it gets to your door. So it's an example of how can we partner together. We're seeing this happen in healthcare all the time. A lot of those acquisitions that you see where it might be the pharmacy side and the insurance side or the payor side, and they're going, okay, what's a way that we can get into, we're not just paying for the prescription, we're actually fulfilling that prescription. We're delivering that, we're selling that to our customer. And so there's partnerships like that popping up, acquisitions like that popping up all the time. So getting that know-how and expertise from the outside. Last question, what are the highest growth industries now and in the foreseeable future? Again, looking out on the horizon, anticipating where the growth is, where is the action, where's the money going to be? You got to stay profitable. So it's finding an economically viable way to serve customer needs, to solve customer problems. Anybody recognize who that is? Who is that? What's that logo represent? We see it on TV quite often. Watson. Yeah. I was blown away a couple of years ago. I was over in the North Park neighborhood, and I was walking by a storefront where there was an H&R Block, and they had a big poster in the window that said something about, we now do your taxes with Watson. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I don't know what that all means, but you got my attention. H&R Block is using Watson, and so we see artificial intelligence and other technology, and we go, okay, what are the possibilities there? And you can get in a real defensive position, and this is particularly true, I think, for those of us who are in finance, where, whether it's we're doing it ourselves or we have a team of people, a lot of those transactional things that are going to be taken over with AI or the bots or whatever, automation, we can look at it that way and kind of feel defensive, and it's like, okay, we need to fight that off somehow. Or we can say, there's opportunity there. There's a lot of opportunity there. How are we going to help our customers solve the problems that they have in trying to adapt some of these technologies or to use some of these technologies? What are some things that we can do there? All right, I'm going to go through into the home stretch here and wrap up. How will you build strategic thinking into your routines? As I said in the opener, it's really difficult because the whirlwind of daily activity is so strong that it just crowds out our ability to do that strategic thinking. So we say it's really important, but it doesn't end up happening. So I want to just give you a few suggestions. One is to set aside time. Second is to find a place, get offline, and then engage your team. So set aside time. This is a typical Google or Outlook calendar. I think the key to strategic thinking is that you actually schedule it. You put a block on your calendar. It's a recurring meeting with yourself to do strategic thinking. I was on a call. I was doing it was a coaching conversation where it was a three-way. It was the CEO and one of his management people that he wanted me to do coaching with, and the CEO gave this manager permission to stare out the window. He said, you need to do more staring out the window. You're too busy clanking away on your computer and talking to people. You're not staring out the window and coming up with new ideas. And some of that is we need to schedule time to stare out the window. Build it into your calendar. Make it the most important part of your week. And if you look at it and write, man, I got so many meetings and all this stuff going on, start small. If you're like, okay, I'm going to take one whole day every week. If you haven't been doing it and you say, I'm going to jump to 8 hours in a week, you're probably going to fail. But if you could find 1 hour in a week, maybe it's the first hour on Monday morning or it's the last hour on Friday, find an hour and then build on it from there. Because I think what you'll see is it's kind of like working out. You know, if you have been on the couch for a long time and you decide that you're going to work out, you don't see immediate results. You don't notice it that day or even that week. You know, it can take several weeks before you start really noticing the difference. I think the same thing is true with this discipline of strategic thinking. It can take a little while to start building up to where it's like, man, all of a sudden I'm coming up with new ideas and new ways of doing things that I've never thought of before. So find a time to do it, find a place. Where's the best place for strategic thinking? Probably not going to be your office. Your office is where all the daily operational details lie, all the distractions, all the interruptions. And if you want to, feel defeated in your effort to become a better strategic thinker, put it on your schedule and then sit in your office. Probably not going to happen there. So one of my clients is a CFO in a healthcare practice out on the West Coast. Twice each week, he stops at a Starbucks on his way into the office, and he spends an hour before he goes to the office just focused on strategic thinking, more critical thinking, and problem solving. It's a way for him to get out of the environment. Here's the other thing that we know about brain science is that when we go to a different environment, when we go to a new place, we get more creative. We get more ideas. It's like we're released from all the other junk that we've left behind, and now we've got an opportunity to think more clearly. Get offline. The real temptation, of course, is you go to the trouble of putting it on the schedule, finding a nice place to go. And, I've gone to picnic shelters and I've gone to hotel lobbies, coffee shops. I mean, you can get creative. Public libraries. There's a lot of things that you can do, place to go. But if you pop open your laptop or you've got your smartphone sitting there with all the notifications popping up, guess what? You're not going to get the real value from it. So I found that it was really helpful for me to go offline, go analog when it comes to strategic thinking. Get the notebook or the legal pad and a pen or a pencil and just start writing out. If you've got research that you've done online, print it out or whatever so you don't have to have your computer on where you're going to get swept away. And then lastly, engage your team. I really think that one of the best values when it comes to strategic thinking as opposed to strategic planning is that you can get everybody involved at all levels within the organization. You can teach your team how to do strategic thinking and how to get some of those ideas. And so figure out how you can develop those strategic thinking skills in others. So here's just a very simple example of how you could do that. Let's say, just for convenience sake, you had a team of 6 people working for you. What you could do is you could assign each one of those 6 one of the questions that we just went through. Those 6 questions to inspire strategic thinking. So, James, you get 1, Michael, you get number 2, Vince, you get number 3, and so on. And you have that question for a month or for a quarter. And all you have to do is practice using that one question. And then periodically, maybe it's once a month, you get together. And I would say don't do this as part of your normal staff meeting. This might be where you get away too, and you just take the team to a coffee shop. You sit around the table and you go, okay, James, what kind of ideas did you come up with from number 1? And you know what? It might be that most of those meetings, those ideas go absolutely nowhere to start out with. But over time, you get dialed in, and all of a sudden, I think you're going to see some breakthroughs, and you're going to be able to credit your team, and it's going to be your leadership that stands out within your organization. All right, one more thing, and then we'll wrap up. I want you to recognize that this is not just about a think tank, okay? Because I know by nature, finance people, we are doers. We like to get in and do the work, get stuff done. And we can look at something like this and go, okay, so I'm staring out the window, and how's that going to really help me get my work done? And at some point, you need to take a step toward execution. So this is a system that I use, and again, I'm going to give you the real simple version, and it's to identify your WIGs, your wildly important goals. The concept comes from a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Highly recommend it. It's a pretty thick book. If you don't want to read the whole book, look up a YouTube video with the author's name, and you can get like the 6-minute version of it. And that will give you enough to get started. So here's what I do. I found that every quarter, I can have 1 or 2 things that I focus on. They're not part of my operational stuff, but they're part of the stuff that's going to improve, grow my business, help me serve my clients and customers better. And so if I just focus on one or two of those areas each quarter, and I use that time that I've put on my calendar, usually by the end of the quarter, I come away with something really valuable. Sometimes it's systems and processes that are improved. Sometimes it's developing new programs or new service lines. But whatever it is, don't try to swallow the ocean. Here's what they found in the research. If you choose 9 or 10 of these wildly important goals, actually I think if you choose over 10 of these wildly important goals to work on at any one time, how many are you going to get done? 0. Yeah, exactly. If you go with like 4 to 9, you've got a pretty good likelihood of getting progress on 1 or 2. And if you choose 3, you've got a pretty good chance of getting progress on, could be all 3. What I found in my own experience is I get progress on 1 or 2. So it's like narrow your focus, get that really dialed in. I sense that you were really engaged in the program this morning. I appreciate that. I'll hang around as long as there's conversation or questions to be had, and be glad to answer any of those questions or talk further on any of these concepts. I want to wish you well. Happy baseball season now that it's here, whether you're a Cubs fan or a White Sox fan. And I'll stick to my Minnesota Twins. And then you're right, Vince. When we get to the fall, it's all Vikings. All right. Thank you very much.